I'm Mark Golub, and one of the things we try to do on JBS is look at the 2016 presidential primaries and then the general election from a Jewish perspective, highlighting the issues which tend to be most important to American Jews when they go to the polls. Currently, the nation is watching candidates for the Democratic and Republican presidential nomination battle it out in the early primaries. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton is favored to hold off the surprisingly strong bid of Senator Bernie Sanders, while on the Republican side, things are far less clear. Coming out of South Carolina, Donald Trump, who also has been a total surprise to all professional politicos and pundits, now has back-to-back wins in New Hampshire and South Carolina, winning all of South Carolina's 50 delegates. Senator Marco Rubio's second-place standing in South Carolina has created serious doubts as to whether Senator Ted Cruz will be the main challenger to a Donald Trump nomination. And in the coming few weeks, more than 500 delegates will be up for grabs in 11 Republican primaries. Of course, traditionally, American Jewry has voted 70% and more for the Democratic candidate. But among Jews for whom the security and future of the State of Israel is of paramount concern, and who have misgivings about both President Obama and the far-left wing of the Democratic Party, there's real interest and attention being paid to the Republican candidates. Now, recently, the Republican candidates visited Washington to speak to the Republican Jewish Coalition, and on JBS, we'll have the remarks of the 5 Republican candidates still in the race. And to help put the Republican candidates' stand on Israel and on U.S.-Israeli relations into better perspective, we're most pleased, as always, to have on our JBS phones the Washington Bureau Chief of the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, Ron Kampeas. Ron, thank you for joining us once again.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, Ron, I have personally no inside information on either the Republican or Democratic primaries. I do speak to Jewish leaders to gauge how they're thinking, but I don't pretend to have behind-the-scenes sources of information. I do my best to stay on top of issues by watching and reading whatever sources I feel give us the best valid information. And often, Ron, I find the general media to be patently biased and irresponsible, attempting to persuade their viewers and readers rather than trying to simply inform their audience. So, Ron, how about you? Before we talk specifics regarding the Republican candidates, do you have any inside sources you speak with who provide you with information the rest of us would not have?
I guess it just in terms of my exchanges every day that I have with people in the Jewish community, with the Jewish leadership. I mean, not a lot of what they're saying to me, just in off-the-record chats, is different from what they're saying in, at least on background or on the record chats. There is, I think, relief that Clinton is emerging as the contender among Democrats. I wouldn't say there's hostility to Bernie Sanders. There's just a lot of not knowing where he stands, particularly on the Israel issue. Actually, we do know where he stands, but there's not a lot of depth or breadth to his foreign policy outlook, because he's focused so much on domestic policy, and also because of as you point out, he does have the backing of the far left of the Democratic Party, and that's been very worrisome, at least for pro-Israel people in recent years. And then on the Republican side, real concern with what's going on with Donald Trump.
Are you saying that you're talking to Jewish leadership who express concern either about, again, Bernie Sanders and now Donald Trump? Again, my initial question was, where do you get your information? So is it my sense here that your information comes from your talking to Jewish leadership, perhaps, off the record, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. It comes from the Jewish leadership.
Okay.
And
What's your feeling, by the way, about the job the general media is doing with regard to the primary contests?
I think it's a problem that occurs every time that there's a heated election like this one. It becomes more of a horse race. So things are taken out of context and blown up, and the issues become who was offended, who wasn't offended. We see a lot less on policy, and more so with this election than any other. I mean, Jeb Bush tried to run a very policy-driven campaign, and he quit. He just quit over the weekend. It wasn't working. The horse race stuff was getting more attention, and I think that's partly like the fault of the media that looks to the kind of things that that creates a kind of a candidacy like Donald Trump's that's based more on personality, on outrageous statements, not just from Trump but from others, than it is on a close look at policy.
Okay. So, Ron, JBS is about to televise the appearances of Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, John Kasich, and Ben Carson, the 5 remaining candidates vying for the Republican nomination, as they spoke to the Republican Jewish Coalition in Washington, D.C. We should say, by the way, there used to be a similar political organization on the Democratic side, the National Jewish Democratic Council, but it has severely curtailed its operations and did not have a similar forum for the Democratic primary contests, candidates, which is why we have nothing to televise for the Democratic Party. But the Republican Jewish Coalition did host all the Republican candidates, and to give you, our viewers, a better sense of where they stand on these issues, we'll be televising their appearances. Ron, were you present in the hall when they spoke?
Unfortunately, no. We had somebody else cover it that day because I had to be out of town on a.
Okay. In general, your sense, did any of them make a particularly strong impression in the hall?
Yeah, of the 5 remaining candidates, I mean, strong impression. Do you mean like a favorable impression? Or
Yes.
unfavorable one?
Yes.
Favorable impression. I mean, certainly Marco Rubio of the 5 remaining candidates is so conversant and so adept at expressing his views on foreign policy in every other venue, and he did that as well in the hall, and so I think he remains a favorite among some pro-Israel Republicans. Certainly now that Bush is out of the race, you're probably going to see a gravitating of people towards Marco Rubio because so many in the Republican Jewish donor community, at least, were attached to the Bush campaign, and I think they see Marco Rubio as the most natural inheritor of Bush's mantle, at least as far as foreign policy stuff goes.
You heard me say before, there are many people who now think that Marco Rubio could give Ted Cruz a real run for his money, that at one point the common philosophy was, the opinion was that it would be Trump-Cruz. Do you feel that in the Jewish community there is an expectation that Marco Rubio will become the challenger and maybe even win the nomination from Donald Trump?
I think that there's an expectation that he might become the challenger. I mean, certainly the fact that he edged out Cruz to come in second in South Carolina makes him more viable. It's said that going into Super Tuesday, the big money goes with Trump and with Cruz, but a lot of the big money was behind Jeb Bush. I think you can expect a lot of that money to get behind Marco Rubio now. Mm-hmm. It's hard to see how Marco Rubio has a path to the nomination right now because Trump has done so well. As you said, he had back-to-back wins in New Hampshire and South Carolina. His team has been focusing on the Super Tuesday races. He is climbing up in the polls. He is benefiting to a degree from the dropping out of other candidates. I don't know whether there is a candidate right now who's going to be able to best Donald Trump.
Very interesting. Okay, so, by the way, again, I'm just a guy, but I was expecting all along that Jeb Bush at one point or another would sort of kick in and the Republican establishment would go with Jeb Bush. I personally was very surprised that he dropped out. He still had a lot of money. He had only recently brought his brother, the former president, in to help campaign with him. I was surprised that he dropped out. Again, Kasich and Carson, who did poorer than Bush, stay in the race. Were you surprised that Jeb Bush dropped out?
I was surprised that he dropped out this early. I'm surprised that, unlike, Kasich had a longer plan. He's waiting for Ohio and Michigan in the middle of next month because those are, he's the governor of Ohio. Michigan is a neighbor to Ohio, and he expects to do strongly in those states. And you'd think that maybe Bush would have had a similar long game plan. But if, and this is not anything that anybody's told me, but or it kind of is actually. I mean, one of the reasons Bush dropped out is that he perceives Trump as a threat, and he's kind of like throwing himself on the pyre. In other words, it's more important to get out, to make to clear the room for a candidate who can take Trump on and Cruz on as well, than it is to to try and be that candidate yourself. So in a way, it was kind of passing the hat, probably to Rubio, although at this point nobody's going to say that because the animosity between Rubio and Bush was so intense for personal reasons over the last few months. But I think that was pretty much a big part of his decision to step down, get out of the way early, clear the way for somebody maybe to take on Trump as we get into the more intense primaries.
Again, the thinking is that Trump has roughly a third of the vote, and if he weren't up against as many candidates, one candidate would in fact be able to take him on. Look, Trump, as you say, is clearly the front runner. He's repeatedly saying that he wants to maintain a position of neutrality on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, which he's described as the most difficult of all conflicts to resolve. What's your sense of the Jewish community's view of Donald Trump, on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and in general, talk a moment more about how you think the Jewish community views Donald Trump?
I think there's great concern about his views of neutrality, certainly in the Republican Jewish community. There are great concerns about his professions of wanting to remain neutral. And it's not just that he says he's going to remain neutral, it's the way that he casts the conflict. So in the segments that you're about to broadcast from the Republican Jewish Coalition Forum, he talks about how he doubts that either side, or he has concerns that neither side has a commitment to peace. And for anybody who's in the mainstream Jewish community, in the pro-Israel community, Israel's offers in 2000 at Camp David, in 2008 as part of the Annapolis process, were seen as generous and painful and turned down. And so how does that not demonstrate commitment? And even more recently, as acrimonious as the most recent round of negotiations were, Netanyahu, now the Monday morning quarterbacks are saying maybe instead of offering a release of prisoners, he should have done another settlement freeze. But the fact is, releasing the prisoners was extraordinarily painful, came at an extraordinary political price to Netanyahu. It really made him unpopular. It almost led to his losing the more recent election, although he came through. So to say that doesn't show commitment, maybe not enough commitment, you can say, but it's to say it doesn't show commitment, there's no commitment, that really resonates badly, I think, among pro-Israel Republicans and the pro-Israel community in general. And as to his how he plays in the broader Jewish community, as you pointed out, the broader Jewish community, the Jews vote for Democrats mostly. And they don't vote for although maybe they once did 30 years ago when it was a different Republican Party. They might have voted for Democrats primarily for pro-Israel reasons, but really they vote for Democrats for domestic reasons. And a lot of as much as actually, there is a certain amount of truth that on certain domestic issues, Trump trends to the left of other Republicans, particularly on health care. There is real concern about some of his statements on immigration. There is real concern about how some of the statements about women, the perception that he'll go into misogyny, and also about Muslims. There's a sensitivity, I think, among Jewish Democrats, among the majority of the Jewish community or organizational community, about marginalizing any group for any reason.
Ron, my own sense is that there are Jews who simply would not vote Republican no matter what. And then there are some Jews who obviously vote Republican all the time. And then there is this middle ground, which I find fascinating. Jews who are very committed to Israel, who've been very upset with the way in which the Obama administration has treated Israel diplomatically. And I run into Jews all the time now who almost apologetically say to me, yeah, there's something about Donald Trump that really appeals to them. I believe there will be a certain number of American Jews who, if Donald Trump gets the nomination, they will vote for him, Ron.
No, for sure. Look, I mean, anybody, you're going to get a minimum amount of any minority voting for the candidate, even though they might be perceived as against the minority's best interests. 11% of Jews voted for George H.W. Bush in 1992, and although I don't think that Bush's position then in 1992 were anything near as concerning as Trump's positions are now, but there's going to be a block of people. You know, there are Hispanics who are voting for Trump, despite what he said about Hispanics. I don't think it's going to be a sizable amount. It's aside from the fact that he does have personal Jewish ties. His daughter converted to Judaism. His grandchildren are being raised Jewish. His son-in-law is Jared Kushner. I think that the combined effect of and you know, I'm talking to conservative Jews, small c politically conservative Jews. The combined effect of what are seen as his bigoted statements and his professed neutrality on Israel aren't doing him any favors in the Jewish community. I don't think he cares. I mean, he says he doesn't care. He says he rejects political correctness, and he says he's going to be the best friend Israel ever had because he says he's going to be the best everything anybody ever had. And that's just the style of his rhetoric. But when it comes to substance, I think it's hard to pin down a view that he has that would be embraced by a lot of the Jewish community. He does have Jewish backers, of course. He has people who are Jewish. Aside from his family, you know, one of his most prominent spokesmen is an executive vice president of one of his companies, Michael A. Cohen, and and he has the New York sensibility. They're going to be New Yorkers who just like him because he's Donald Trump. Nationally, I don't think that he's. We'll see. I mean, if he becomes the candidate, we'll see what he does. But and he could win the election. I just don't think he's going to be able to do it with the Jewish vote.
Mm-hmm. By the way, do you think that Donald Trump is a racist?
I don't know. I mean, you know, I have to
By the
look.
way, I'm going to take the I don't know. I think that's the most honest answer. I think there are a lot of people in the media and in the Jewish world who have just decided he's a racist. I think it's so much more complicated than that. And I think Donald Trump has a style of speaking. He tends to be hyperbolic. He tends to speak in large, sweeping generalities. But when you pin him down, I don't get the sense that he hates in any way, is bigoted against Hispanics, or is somehow anti-woman. And I think that those in the media who present him that way are going to find a serious backlash, especially because the media right now, Ron, the media may be hated as much as politicians. I've also been in the presence of Ted Cruz. I've had a chance to interview Ted Cruz. I saw him speak at the ZOA dinner. He does that on a regular basis. There are people in the Jewish community, especially on the right, the Sheldon Adelson crowd, who are very taken with Ted Cruz.
Oh yeah, sure.
Talk about that for a moment and how Ted Cruz plays in the Jewish community.
Yeah, I think Ted Cruz plays very well in some segments of the Jewish community. I think he showed smarts by hiring his Jewish right-hand man for the Jewish community, Nick Musin. a guy who was close to Tim Scott, the black senator from South Carolina, who incidentally endorsed Marco Rubio. But, Musin's very smart about the Jewish community, very smart about what plays in. Ted Cruz has shown a lot, has been very aggressive in defending Israel against what he sees as the Obama administration's slighting of Israel, and he's done very well. I mean, there is a concern within a subset of the politically conservative Jewish community about his attacks on neoconservatives. And it's two levels. The one level is philosophically. I mean, the neoconservative comes out. It's a very American point of view, neoconservatism, but it also comes out of its foreign policy comes out of a very Jewish sensitive point of view that rejects isolationism, that rejects non-interventionism. Why? Because of what happened during World War II. And the delay that the Americans took in terms of getting into a war that was wiping out the Jewish people. So there's that concern. And the other thing is that there's a difficulty when somebody sort of disparages neocons, as he does, and then also throws in New York values. And I don't think there's a lot of substance to this. I'm saying how this plays among certain conservative Jews, that those are code words for Jews. That he's saying, when he talks about New York values, he talks about Donald Trump's chutzpah, and he emphasizes the ch in chutzpah,
Yes.
and he's using coded things to distance New York and the Jewish component of New York from the heartland. I want to go back to what you were saying about Trump. It's true. When I say I don't know if he's a racist. I don't know, because I don't know what goes into a man's heart. I think that one can safely only call somebody a racist or an anti-Semite if they're full-time dedicated to that proposition. And as you say, Trump is all over the place. He'll say one thing, he'll say another thing. But I think that the way that anti-Semitism and bigotry and misogyny and racism work in our society is that they become, when it's a weapon that you can use politically against a rival in whatever kind of situation, the test of a politician, the test of somebody with, of moral fiber is, do you use that? Like I said, I don't think Ted Cruz is using it he's not dog whistling with New York values, but that goes to the broader question. Do you use that? Do you use that to try and undercut the person that you're trying to defeat? Do you rely on those things without being a racist yourself? Do you appeal to racists? Do you appeal to misogynists? Certainly, when Trump talks about most of the Mexicans coming across the border being rapists, that comes across to Mexicans as a dog whistle. When he talks about Hillary Clinton being shrill, comes as a dog whistle, I think, to a lot of women who have spent a lot of their time trying to be heard and end up being called shrill. So I don't even know if it's germane whether to describe him as a racist or somebody who's a bigot. What's more germane is he ready to use bigotry in order to sell his brand? And I think that he has been using it, and he needs to be called out on that.
At some point, you and I will be sitting at a table together in person, and we will go into that more. I think it's much more subtle than you're making it, and that Donald Trump is being very specific about whom he's criticizing, and that it is not sweeping generalities, which are typical of, for example, anti-Semites. For an anti-Semite, it is basically all Jews are. And
that's true, but we've also had the situation in the Jewish community where we'll see people who are saying, "Oh, of course, not all Jews are like this. Just the ones who are pro-Israel are like this." There are certain, and the majority of Jews are pro-Israel. There are certain things that you can use a symbol or an image to convey an idea, and then wink and say, "Not all people are this." Yeah, and of course, in the famous speech where he talked about Mexican rapists, he said, "I'm sure there are good Mexicans." That's not a big reassurance to actual Mexican Americans and to people who are trying to get by every day. Like I said, it's perceived as dog whistling.
I thought you said there was a surprisingly large vote of Latinos for Donald Trump.
No, I said that there will be Latinos who will vote for Donald Trump. There is a Hispanics for Donald Trump society. I think, like you're always going to get people who are going to vote one way, whatever happens, whoever is the candidate. And like I said, for instance, I heard people saying, you need for the Republican, like George Bush had in 2000, Republican needs 40% of the Latino vote to win. Mitt Romney got 27% in 2012, just after talking about self-deportation, which itself is not it's not a racist comment. It's just a comment that I think that upset a lot of Latino Americans. I forget where I was hearing this, but they were saying Trump could push down that share of the vote to 17%. Yeah, so 17 out of 100, almost one in every five Hispanics are going to meet, and that's a lot. If you're going into a Hispanic society and talking to people every day, and one in every five or one in every six said, "Yeah, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump," it seems like a lot, but still, the overwhelming number of Hispanics, even if it's 17, 18, 19, 20%, the overwhelming number of Hispanics are not going to.
Okay, but they didn't vote for Romney to a greater extent.
Yeah,
and Romney, you are not criticizing Romney in the way you're criticizing Trump.
I don't think that. I think when Romney was talking about self-deportation, I don't think it was a dog whistle. I think it was just a clumsy way of trying to figure out how he was going to get across something that isn't a racist issue, which is the issue of whether you agree with it or not. Should America be more welcoming to the immigrants, the undocumented, immigrants or not? It's a different issue, but it's not one that has within it the generalizations that appear to come up when you're talking about criminals and rapists and murderers crossing the border. So it's not the same issue. And like you said, yeah, a lot of people didn't vote for him, but that was more political. I think Trump's statements are going to drive this down further. Trump is going to be very vulnerable. And as you said, there's a backlash. There's a backlash against being politically correct. But look what happened with Hillary Clinton in 2000 when she was running against Rick Lazio. As soon as he appeared to make her being a woman an issue, with that famous comment about how she enabled Bill Clinton, etc., he killed himself. He was finished. He was a contender. He might have defeated her. That was it. Hillary Clinton was going to go on and become the senator from New York. I think that's a dynamic that once it's one-on-one, once it's Trump versus Clinton, or Trump versus Sanders, and that's a whole other scenario, because if Sanders comes in, I think Bloomberg comes in, and then Trump has a real shot at the presidency. But once it's Trump versus Clinton, that's going to happen again, and he's going to marginalize himself one-on-one. He might pivot. He's a very good showman. As we've seen, he's a very savvy reader of the American psyche. He might pivot. I don't know if he successfully pivots, because we live in an age where every single thing is recorded. He tried very hard to suppress interviews he did in the late 1990s in which he seemed to favor partial birth abortion, but he couldn't. And in that case, he was successful. He overcame doubts about his commitment against abortion. I don't know if he can do that now, especially with minorities. And again, it's not even a matter of him getting minorities to vote for him. It's a matter of the minorities of women coming out to vote just because they don't want him to win. And I think
I love talking to you. You bring fascinating points. We have to continue the dialogue. I will continue to call you as the primary season continues. We'll see the extent to which this Donald Trump phenomenon is in any way understandable. But as always, I appreciate the time, Ron. I wish you all the best, and we will talk again very soon.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you. The thoughts of Ron Kampeas, Washington Bureau Chief of the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. Once again, a program reminder, we will be bringing you the Republican candidates speaking to the Republican Jewish Coalition in Washington to give you a better sense of where they stand on issues of importance to the Jewish community. We hope you find it helpful. My thanks as always to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, the associate director of JBS, Dara Golub, and to the producers of this edition of Election 2016, Kara Lilienthal and Jan Weiss. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.